The conversation around AI often focuses on models, breakthroughs, and who's winning the race. But beneath all of that is a bigger question. Who controls the technology shaping our future? From compute and data to regulation and infrastructure, the decisions being made today will determine who benefits from the AI era tomorrow. Today, we're joined by Irina von Rosen, investor, AI strategist, and advocate for responsible AI, to explore sovereignty, competition, and what it takes to build AI ecosystems that last. This is Forging the Future. Welcome to the show, Irina.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So tell me, what does AI sovereignty really actually mean?
Genuinely speaking, it is the ability of countries or companies or individuals to control where their AI use or development happens. Where does the data come from, or where is it stored? Where is their infrastructure, and how the consequences of AI outputs or decisions or actions would actually be implemented. And it's tricky because some people understand it as something that they need to have, right? It's their right to have, and some people are like, yeah, it's fine. We can live without that.
So is it more at a country level? For example, hey, we don't want to use China LLM, or we don't want to use the US LLM. We need to have our own model. We don't want to give these countries our data. Is that what they really mean by the sovereignty part?
At the country level, yes. There is a lot of conversations around having data centers built within the country for data privacy reasons or data protection reasons. A lot of talk about where the chips come from or where the GPUs are built, where the workers come from, right? Who trains those models and what kind of points of view or biases might be embedded in the models, and also where the investments come from. It's a tricky part. But it's also true at the company level. At the company or on the business side, it's more about, you've been around the digital for ages, right? It's the same vendor lock that we've known the consequences of for the last 40, 50 years, right? Something sounds like a great, phenomenal deal at the moment. And then the next quarter turns out scaling it or integrating across all the processes across the whole organization, or just getting the next version, the simple maintenance, might actually be more complex or more expensive or both. So a lot of companies unwillingly right now start rethinking about what AI sovereignty means for them as well, just like everyone has been thinking about the vendor lock.
Some concern that once you start getting hooked on the AI in business, and AI basically permeates all sections of the business, right? You're basically getting really super plugged in to these different models and being dependent on them.
Yeah.
And then later you wake up one day and realize just how dependent you are, right? Now you're all in on Anthropic, or you're all in on whatever your LLM of choice was, right?
Yeah.
But how do you mitigate that?
That's the whole why it's such a complex discussion at the moment, right? So at the company level, it takes a lot of planning and a lot of testing, piloting, model comparison, and so on. And it's not just LLMs, AI in general, maybe other types, classic machine learning or classic AI takes a lot less resources, and LLMs or agentic AI is, first of all, very resource consuming. And second, with classical LLMs, the outputs are a lot more predictable. Whereas with LLMs, you might say, okay, Claude has just become like the best model. We are going to abandon our previous vendor and we are going to go with the newest model from Claude. I think Fable 5 is the latest one. But all of your prompts, all of your architecture, everything that you have built for the old or the previous model or another vendor with another model just give completely different output, right? That unpredictability, that randomness of LLMs is what makes them so complex to integrate or to switch across renders, or to, even when you stick with the same vendor, switch from one version to another, switch from different model to another. And a lot of companies at the moment are thinking, well, maybe it's not about connecting to a third party API. Maybe we need to actually build models in house so we have more control over what goes into the inputs, but also what we can get, or what constraints we can put on the outputs. Again, this is about costs. This is about convenience. This is about having expertise in-house versus relying on third-party providers. And again, the current generation of AI has pretty much the same problem as classic AI, as classic machine learning, as classic digital technology, cloud computing, has had the same problems. But it just takes them on a completely different scale, right? The complexity and the cost and the resources needed are just unimaginably larger for generative and agentic AI than for anything we've seen before.
Yeah, I think at first I was thinking when you were talking about sovereignty, it was more like, kings and queens and countries, right?
Yes.
But I think what you're saying is it's more about, independence at even a business level, right? So this is more complicated in deciding whether you're going to use Amazon, AWS versus Google Cloud versus Microsoft, Azure or something like that, where those services are more or less plug and play autonomous to some extent. But with AI, there's a lot of, moving pieces, and you actually get different answers from different models, right? So if you're using Anthropic or you're using OpenAI or you're using Grok or you're using some Chinese LLM, how easy is it going to be for you to switch as a business, and how important is it, what kind of variables are you going to get from each LLM having its particular worldview or its understanding of, the data, and how does that impact your business, right? So it's going to be a lot harder to essentially switch horses, I guess, between different models.
So true, so true. And also all the security risks, both at the company level and at the country level, all the geopolitical risks. Again, just the scale of it is much higher than, as you've mentioned, with cloud or other digital tech.
And do you think companies are really thinking about that right now? Or maybe
I
not
think so.
enough?
I think you're right. Not enough. It's more like, well, it's happening, but maybe it will all be fine if we just pretend that everything is as usual. Or maybe a lot of companies don't have enough visibility into their value chain. So connecting to a third-party API sounds like a very easy thing to do technically, right? So you connect to a foundational model provided by somebody else. It's all on a platform that you already use, whether it's the AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft. But when it comes to where the data sits, how the model has been trained, or like you said, which biases have been included in it. And so there are two risks, right? We already see those risks. At the country level, there are geopolitical risks, there are ethical risks, there are security risks with AI giving wrong information or biased information, or providing an outlet for a security breach or for an infiltration by a hostile third party agent. On the other hand, we already see OpenAI and Google and all other providers writing partnership agreements with advertisement companies, right? So now you're getting answers from your LLMs. Are you sure that those are accurate answers? Or somebody has paid for you to get exactly those answers, right? So the results that you see in Google search, or the AI overview on top of Google search, the results that you get in your LLMs, how can you choose what you're guessing versus somebody has made that choice for you?
It is interesting of how do you assess that, right? You see some of that, and people have seen some of that even during the elections and the politics when they're asking, about whether it's Donald Trump or they're asking about Hillary Clinton or one candidate or another. I think there was a period of time where you could ask it a question about, a Democratic candidate and it would give you an answer. And you ask a question about the Republican candidate and would say, I can't answer anything about politics or something like that, right? So if you take that to an extreme, then of course, there's a lot of, like you said, biases in the LLMs that you just don't really know how that data was trained and what kind of answer you're going to get out of it, depending on where it actually formed that data. And then as soon as people figure out how to actually inject advertising into these LLMs, I don't think they have quite figured it out yet. I think there was some funny trials with Anthropic and stuff where they actually even highlighted that.
Well, as far as I have seen, OpenAI has admitted that they have, or admitted and then backtracked that they have started integrating advertisement in their outputs. You can see it like when you're getting outputs from any model, and then you ask the same question, the same prompt in another model. Are you getting the same answers? Are
Yeah,
you
usually
getting
you're not. In fact, you sometimes are getting the exact opposite answer. And then if you take that and apply it to like business, for example,
yeah,
you don't really know the impact that
no,
is having.
yeah, yeah.
There's all kinds of, there's a lot of difficulty. This is all very new. It's all very complicated. On the one hand, it makes things a lot simpler. On a lot of other areas, it makes it harder, right? Security is an obvious one. Is the data getting ingested and used to train models? And a lot of times you don't want your data in there. There's other things like repeatability, for example, like a lot of business use cases require you to track how things arrived at a certain decision, and so there's a lot of work now on tracking how an AI made a certain decision, and can you make that? Can you follow that path and repeat it? But then when the AI company releases a new model, that path may be completely different, right? So it's how do you have a documented path of reproducibility in your business data? And I think, I don't think people are thinking about it because we're all trying to move so fast and keep up. We all have this sense of we've got to get going and let's adopt it, and problems will be worked out later. But we may end up 3-6 months from now or a year from now thinking, oh my gosh, what just happened?
Oh, that's so true. That long-term perspective, thinking about like what are the consequences, what are the costs, what are the downstream effects, and where would we be in a year or 5 years from now if we don't deal with the consequences, if we don't prevent the risks right now. I think a lot of companies, I fully agree, they just rush into adoptions to show the quarterly results right now, to get the yearly bonuses for executives. Very understandable, but a very misguided goal, I would say, if your financial future would be put at risk, the company would be put at risk. So we'll see how this plays out, but I think I agree with you. The reproducibility, the accuracy, the explainability, the transparency of AI decisions mean that in many cases, classic automation, classic hardware, classic AI, so machine learning or data science solutions, still outperform LLMs in many business processes where complexity and accuracy and high stake consequences really don't give you a lot of leeway for, yeah, we'll just wing it. If the answer is random, who cares?
Mhm.
You cannot really afford that in
Or if it changes, right? I mean, well, first of all, I
mortgage.
think like advertising is it's going to come. It has to come, right? I mean, Google search was built on advertising. There's a lot of discussion of how do we do AEO, right? AI engine optimization. How do we rank when you ask ChatGPT what's the best hardware, firmware, embedded company in Houston? Do I want that to be soft tech at the top? Well, sure, I do. But, right now I think it is, more organic and maybe a little bit more, okay, let's just say truthful in that it's going out there and getting data and making a decision. It's not influenced by who paid more for a particular ad, but it is something that we need to look at. But how does a company really, if you really do want to pay attention to this now, on top of everything else, right? Is there anything that a company should be doing to think about this independence from the AI models, in your opinion?
Well, like you said, thinking long term and developing an AI strategy that is very tightly linked to the business strategy and not rushing into AI adoption, not buying into hype, not buying into the vendor promises and getting themselves into the trap of a vendor lock. This would be like a universal recommendation, I think. And then it really depends on the company, on the size of the company, where they are, the industry, and so on. For many companies that I work with in highly regulated industries, such as engineering or healthcare or fintech, where the cost of mistakes, or the cost of wrong AI output or wrong AI decision or wrong automated decision would be extremely high, and reputational damage and financial damage is something that all companies would really want to avoid. That long term thinking is what gets us to be a lot more cautious with, okay, how do we think about security first? How do we think about reproducibility and explainability first? How do we think about ethics first? And that informs choices of, for example, which cloud platform or which data center do we use, right? Maybe some of it is not on the cloud, some of the processing happens on prem. That balance, that combination of factors is what gets the company thinking. And it's not about compliance, right? People think, oh, you're highly regulated, therefore you're doing it just to stay on the legal side. No, not at all. This is more about long-term resilience, right? This is about the future, about forging the future, as the topic is. This is more about where do we want to be, and if we want to be a successful business, not just today and tomorrow, but how do we ensure that we stay successful years from now? And that ensures the sovereignty of data, that ensures sovereignty of models, that ensures that we have talent in-house to actually deal with this. So a lot of decisions that get made around whether to outsource something or have experts in-house, whether to clean up the data and prepare the data, prepare all the business processes before we rush into buying a model from a vendor who promises us 100% security and 100% accuracy, right? How do we deal with the basics, the foundation will determine our long-term success. And I think a lot of I welcome those conversations around AI sovereignty because ultimately it is about control. It is about ownership. But as much of that is about resilience for the future.
So would you suggest that you wouldn't be using the open models and it would be something like you would explore using local LLMs so that you would have more control? Because in a broad case of sovereignty recently, right, the US government decided not to use Anthropic anymore because Anthropic's owners had a different, say, political view or stance on certain things that the US government felt were important, right? And they're saying, we're not going to support these efforts with our model. And the government is like, well, no, we want to use it for that. And that was the friction, right? So that can happen at smaller micro levels at a business, right? You don't know who's making those decisions in the model, and they might not be aligned with yours, or they might change how they decide to give you answers on certain topics that then is going to materially impact your business. But, it seems to me the only way to get around that is to have more control of the model itself, right? And the version of the model. But you're not actually training the model, right? Even if you get a model from China or wherever, run it locally and have more control of your own data, it's been trained in a way that you really didn't have any control over.
Well, if we are talking about foundation models specifically, yes. For me, AI is much broader than just LLMs, so I have to keep in mind also, automation, rule-based systems, classic ML, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are talking about foundation model, I think particularly when it comes to the very tricky and very uneasy interactions between political parties or governments, national governments, and private companies. So you've mentioned the friction between the US government and Anthropic, but then OpenAI last week has come out and said that they would give a 5% stake in the company to the American government. And that immediately makes everyone think, okay, so does that mean that just like in the case of any other state-owned companies like Chinese companies or Russian companies, any other countries where government gets involved in business, does that mean that the product will be influenced by the views of the American government? And how would that play for the business customers and for the individuals and so on? So all of those questions, I think a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals, a lot of countries would have to deal with and are dealing already. But in the upcoming months, I think as we see a lot of geopolitical conflicts getting more and more tense, as we see a lot of upcoming elections, as we see possibly financial markets getting very, very volatile at the moment. How would that play out for the countries, the businesses, investors, and individuals? And I have my predictions. I would love to hear yours. Where are we headed, Chris?
Well, I don't know if I thought enough about predictions, but there are certainly some scary scenarios, right? Like you said, what is the impact of a government having partial ownership of an open, foundational, LLM like OpenAI, and is that going to mean it's a different form of government censorship where it's propaganda essentially? You're going to ask it, who's the greatest president of all time, and what's the answer going to be? And did the government have a hand in that? I think it's a pretty interesting to think about. And then just even the whole recent controversy over Wikipedia, being can it be considered a source of truth? And even the Wikipedia founder getting kicked out of the platform that he actually built. I mean, the founder no longer has access to do anything with Wikipedia because they felt like he was, I don't know what he was doing, but he doesn't have it anymore, right? But you mentioned you had some of your own. What are some of your predictions if you had to predict the future? Because most people, they think linearly, right? So you think about, well, what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years? Well, 5 or 10 years in AI is going to be 50 to 100 years, something like that. Things are moving very quickly. We're starting to get on that exponential curve. So what do you think?
Well, again, it's tricky to predict because, like you said, the scale and the speed of change is quite unlike anything we've seen before. At the same time, I'm pretty sure that we have already seen the most that could be extracted from LLMs, given the current architecture, given the current training capabilities. They might get less costly if there are improvements on the memory side. They might get more capable in terms of handling more context or handling longer conversations and so on. We see newer models being better than the previous one. As somebody told me recently, the pipeline from production to haiku, where you're absolutely impressed and want that model to handle everything for you, your whole business for you, and then you're using it basically for entertainment 2 months later. That pipeline has come for all models so far, and it will keep coming for them. So I think on the LLM side, we will see improvements. We won't see anything drastically different. To get something drastically different, we would need to see some improvements on the accuracy and security side. To get there, that shouldn't be LLMs, right? That would be world models, that would be neurosymbolic AI, that would be something with a lot more integration with the real world, with IoT, with physics, the actual real world, which is very complex. So we will see how long it would take us to get to the new type, the new generation of AI models. I think when we get there, that would be a very exciting world, because that would be truly like asking the model or pushing a button and getting the model to give you the answer that you want and that you expect, rather than a randomized token prediction, as LLMs do that, where you're hoping that the answer is something that you want. So what I'm interested in, and what we are investing in, is a lot on the energy side, so and infrastructure side. So again, what I would love to see is a future that's a lot more responsible and a lot more sustainable long term, which again requires that we stop thinking about the scale as the only parameter that matters, and start thinking about accuracy and convenience and cost and ethics, et cetera, and the value of human lives and the value of human future in this. How would you want to live in the future, right? How would you envision the future? I hope it wouldn't be something where AI just consumes all the resources, leaving nothing for humans, wouldn't you?
If you are enjoying this conversation, don't miss what's next. Subscribe to Forging the Future at softec.com/FTF, and we'll send you our ultimate guide to Edge AI. Learn how to get started with Edge AI, how Edge AI is reshaping the business landscape, and plus you'll get a checklist to evaluate your Edge AI readiness. Thanks for tuning in, and subscribe now. Yeah, definitely trying to think about what the future looks like and how we live in it is something to reflect on. I mean, I started my career with storing code in holes punched in paper. So if I think about, that was 40 years ago, let's say, what does the next 40 years look like? If what we have right now is the equivalent of AI using holes punched in paper, right, at a basic level, I feel like it's going to continue to evolve to those high levels where, humans will have it. Well, it's already smarter in a lot of ways than we are. But on the other hand, when they show like AI training AI, it quickly erodes, right? So what we really need in that whole thing is that the training comes from the human creativity and the human knowledge, and AI isn't creating anything on its own. And when it does, it's very derivative and actually degrades down to something very, grotesque, actually. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about what's 10 years look like. I don't know how we mitigate it, maybe getting some control over it, not just like letting it run rampant, right? We don't want the robo apocalypse to come. So, but do you think we're moving toward like multiple AI ecosystems? Is that one way to mitigate it? Or is it something where we need to take control of the AI model internally? It's almost, we kind of vacillate between like cloud-based computing back to desktop-based computing. Now we're back to cloud-based computing. And so the AI exists a lot in the cloud right now, except for edge AI devices that are doing machine learning and some small LLM stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think to get our own independence and sovereignty, we need to have our own local AI per business, for example?
That's a great question. I think one of the most misunderstood things about AI sovereignty is that sort of black and white thinking. And I see that a lot at the country level, at the government level. It's like, oh, we need to be fully independent. We cannot allow ourselves to lose the AI race or something like this. But the truth is, a lot of it is very nuanced, and a lot of it is better done in partnerships with somebody, right? You cannot require every company to produce their own chips and to build their own data centers.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not how anything works.
Right.
Again, for the sake of cost and for the sake of resilience for the future, you want to have backups of different systems. You want to have control over your data and your models. But how exactly you exercise that control as a company, as a business, or as a country, there could be 50 shades of gray, right? There could be different solutions for different needs. There
It'd
could
be
be
like a server concept is what I'm thinking. When
yeah.
Google started as a business, their model wasn't actually indexing the entire internet. They thought they were going to sell a hardware device, a Google appliance that was then going to index your business's local data on its intranet. That's what they thought they were going to do, right? And so I can see a possibility that you're doing something similar where you're running your own model, you have more control of your own AI. Of course, machine learning and all that is also very similar. You have your own models and stuff for your devices. And also, not everything has to know everything, right? You don't need your vacuum cleaner to know who the president is, or whatever, right? It's like, it doesn't need to be very smart, just like we see in the natural world, right? You only need to be smart enough to be a bug that knows how to do certain things, a bee that goes and pollinates flowers. It doesn't have to be smart enough to take over the world, right? And so I think there needs to be a lot of limitations around, forming the power of the technology to the task, right?
Absolutely. And I think that thinking will also get us to the point where we're a lot more mindful about the cost and the accuracy, the applications of AI and digital tech in general, right? So, for example, a lot of LLMs are currently being integrated as agentic workflows across everything, right? I want an AI agent to handle my emails, to handle my bills, to handle something. Right? if you just stop for a second, do you actually need that, or do you need some critical thinking and you want actually to exercise some of your own expertise, right? Then it turns out that no, actually, a normal email filter would be enough to deal with my emails. And if I go to a doctor, I would really want to go to a doctor that has studied really hard and that has the expertise to actually evaluate what my disease might be, and not just predict patterns from the descriptions of my symptoms.
Mm.
As attractive as it can be, I think what I would hope to see in the future is more value of human expertise, human critical thinking, before we start delegating everything to um, token predictions.
Well, you've led some AI transformations already, right? I mean, and we're pretty early in this whole process, but where do you see what drives success in those types of transformations?
True business processes are extremely complex. A lot of those decisions, a lot of those workflows, a lot of those operations that define business success cannot be encoded in hard data, let alone used with the token prediction model, right? So defining very specifically where AI is appropriate and where it's not appropriate, getting the data foundation, the infrastructure foundation, the compute ready, right? Making sure that all of that is actually clean and usable and is not like fantasy land where you have 40 versions of your HR policies and you just hope that LLMs will find the right one. And also being very, very proactive with cybersecurity, with ethical AI governance, as as a prerequisite, as a safety that guarantees that nothing will go wrong. Right? It's not about again. It's not about stopping people from doing innovation or doing digital transformation. It's more about how do we make sure that it goes right. And a lot of that thinking is like, think twice before jumping off the cliff. Do you actually want to do that? Or can we actually find another way, maybe a less steep way down?
Seems like there's two companies. They either want to use AI, and then you ask them if where's your data, and they don't have any, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you can't do anything with AI unless you have some data, because we need to give them the data so that it can infer from that data. Or they've got a tremendous amount of data and they think they have something, but it's like you said, it's outdated, it's conflicting, it's garbage data, so garbage in, garbage out. And then there's also a huge amount of effort that goes into labeling the data, essentially, right, for the AI. This is what we're looking for. It's easier to think about like images, right? So data labeling is, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a bear, this is a parrot, right? And so you're like, let's train it what a cat looks like and what it doesn't look like. And data is very similar that way, but it's hard for people to visualize in their data lake. Where are all the kittens, right? Where are all the cats that you want to try to find and sift and use? And how do you scrub that data? And then it also turns out that process never ends, right? Because the data, every day they're collecting more data, and you have to keep scrubbing data, and you have to keep improving your model. So it's a big effort, but it's all has nothing to do with the way that AI actually works, right? You've got this brain, but you have to give it that data piece, right?
You have to have the data first, absolutely. I think having the models trained or fine tuned appropriately is also super important, right? AI is a system which it has the data component as the foundation, but it's a little bit like if we want to visualize AI, it's a little bit like a car, right? With data as fuel or energy, electricity. Without that fuel, the car is not going anywhere. But just because you've got the data does not mean that you have the car and you're ready to drive off, right? You still need to have the engine, you still need to have the whole infrastructure and compute part. You
And a
still
plan
need,
of where you're going, right?
and the plan where
We
you're
got the
going.
car and the fuel, but we don't want to now drive off the cliff, which
Yes,
maybe a
yes.
lot of companies are doing right now.
Given that a lot of people and businesses still have some fears around, job replacement and AI destroying the world or consuming all the resources and so on.
Is it going
If
to destroy the world?
I love sci-fi as much as the next person, but no, like in the current universe, I think the doomerism or the doom scenarios are way overblown. However, it can make a lot of lives and a lot of businesses very, very uncomfortable, right? By consuming way too much resources. And I'm not talking just about physical resources like energy and water, although that's where it's all is. But also, as an investor, I have to think about opportunity costs, right? And what we see at the moment, particularly in Silicon Valley, but all over the world, is that a lot of investments are going into startups based on simply on promises, on hype. Millions and billions and trillions of dollars are getting invested in something that may or may not come true, the promises of artificial general intelligence, superintelligence,
But isn't that
whatnot.
okay? I mean, that's R&D effort, right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of money being thrown at this and a lot of unknowns, and we don't really know what's going to come of it. But do you think maybe it's being spent in the wrong way?
Yes,
Mm.
because again, if we are comparing the opportunity cost, right? If we are looking at what those trillions of dollars could have been spent on,
Mm.
from cancer research to renewable energy sources to mitigating the effects of climate change, we actually see that, oh, wait, we could have built a better future without going for this fantasy world, right? I love sci-fi. I love fairy tales. I'm not investing in fairy tales. I don't see why would anyone want to invest in fairy tales. There are real technologies that could be invested in that are very practical, that have business purpose, and that have real promise. Fairy tales is something that is, I guess, getting people on TV or getting them speaker slots at conferences, at podcasts. I'm not sure that's good enough for investors.
Some of that might be aspirational, of course, but you mentioned cancer research. I mean, we're trying to build an AI that can actually be better at doing this type of research and solving these math problems and coming up with better solutions. And AI is already better at, reading X-rays. And we already have lots of problems where people are still getting cancer. Cancer is being missed because they're not interpreting the data correctly, and that it's already, the AI is doing a better job at that, right? Or maybe possibly coming up with some better drugs or techniques, right? And so, I mean, I think that's part of the positive side of the aspirational future, right?
Absolutely, yeah, I fully agree. But again, all of those models are classic deep learning. They are
Mm.
not LLMs. So, like for me, it's the I think the trigger point is: are we actually investing in practical solutions of AI, or are we investing in something that talks like a human, imitates human really convincingly? And I think that is where it breaks for me a lot, because invest in deep learning? Yes, absolutely. Let's do more of that. Invest in LLMs. Have we actually thought about how that architecture should work? Because the architecture has limitations that cannot be overcome, right? You cannot just say that it will happen if we just throw more data at it.
So what you're saying is, for example, we don't need to be too, we don't spend $1 trillion trying to create an AI that approaches, godlike powers, for example, of smarts. And instead of, a humanoid robot is great, but it doesn't have to be, indistinguishable from a person. You want a humanoid robot that can weld. You want a humanoid robot that can maybe pick your crops, or it's a version of that, because we don't have farmer generations right now. No one wants to take over the family farm, for example, right? And so we do need to have more robots that can harvest the crops. It's a dangerous activity anyway. You don't need to have migrant workers coming in to pick your apples or whatever else that you have in your crop. And people aren't having 10 kids anymore to take over the family farm. And even if they did, they don't want it, right? And so there's going to be a lot of jobs that people just don't want to do. Does a person actually have to drive the car? Is it a bad thing that there won't be any taxi drivers anymore? Will we be safer when the cars drive themselves? I mean, it's already proven to be true, right? So that's a better future. And maybe we don't even need to own cars, because I can just walk out the front door here, get in a car, go home, and I don't care where that car goes, right? So what you're saying is we don't need this master AI that knows anything and everything, but we do need to have devices that have enough smarts that can do that particular job better, right?
Yeah, I think in your example with family farms, every farm is using a tractor or like lots of other types of technology. I don't believe they need a humanoid robot necessarily, because again, humanoids are an interesting marketing material, but ultimately, human bodies are very inconvenient for doing specialized tasks, right? What's the most successful household innovation of the past 15 years? A Roomba, right? A robot vacuum cleaner. It does not look like a maid in high heels with an apron and lipstick and so on. You don't put lipstick on your washing machine.
Rosie the robot.
No, you have.
Although I would
you have
argue, I don't know how successful it was. It's pretty good at spreading dog poop all over your house.
it's it's an extremely profitable sector, and it's sparked the whole new category of appliances.
No, but
what
I
I'm
agree
saying-
with you. You don't need humanoids for everything. There's a lot of companies out there that are doing a lot of other kind of robots, and there's a lot of disadvantages to being a human. We do live in a human-oriented world, so in a lot of ways, a humanoid robot can navigate that world in a similar way. But you're right, you don't necessarily need a humanoid robot to pick the crop. And the John Deere tractors of the world already are adding GPS navigation and autonomy and self-driving and all that. And you don't need a robot driver in the Uber, right? There doesn't need to be a robot at all, right?
I think it's like the classic form follows function, right? What is the best form to perform this specific function? Then you choose how it should look. A lot of humanoid robots that I see right now are humanoid simply for marketing purposes. The other question that I think you raised, which is super important, is the ethics of job replacement and the ethics of building a world for the future, right? Do we want a world in which humans are feeling good and live comfortably and are valued, where human expertise, human critical thinking, human skills are valued? I think they're irreplaceable. I think that building a better future for me ultimately means building a better world for humans. I don't care about building a better world for robots. I don't care about robot well-being, but sorry. But I care about the well-being of my friends and my family and nice colleagues that I collaborate with. I want to build a better future that actually, prioritizes expertise and prioritizes human creativity and human spirit. For a lot of those decisions, that means thinking about the consequences of the decisions that we are making right now. And in terms of tasks, I like my toaster, right? And I like my fridge. What I don't try to do is to make toast in my fridge, right? So it's the same thing with AI. What is the function that we are trying to do, and what is the most appropriate tool that would be best at performing that specific task? I don't see the need for superintelligence, let alone how that's actually possible anytime soon. But I definitely know that the current conversations around superintelligence are way overpromised and just feeding hype rather than the actual, business outcomes. I don't see business outcomes without like concrete proof. And for that, I hope we will see something good for, specific tools for specific functions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but it is interesting, how things are evolving. And I always think you need a little bit of hype in order to move some things forward. But you're right. How much do you want to spend on things that aren't going to necessarily have the ROI later? I think investors do have a pretty, big interest and eye toward putting their money behind things that they can be monetized. But we'll see. There's a lot of hype in AI, but there's a lot of real value, I think, being created there as well. And it's going to be definitely an interesting future. I'm happy to see that the sci-fi of my 60s childhood coming to life in front of my eyes. And maybe I need to get more involved in the robots so I can program in a safe word. So it won't hurt me, but anyway.
I think we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic and actually hope for the better future, because again, I see a lot of very smart people doing really, really cool work in AI and robotics. In terms of investment, I think comparing to what we have seen in the past, right, how innovation cycles or new technology cycles have happened, we have seen the dot-com bubble, for example, bursting, but the internet infrastructure, all the internet cables that were laid out, still support us. However, in the 50s, when overhyped AI capabilities like Eliza being the super intelligence of the day triggered what was at the time an enormous amount of investment. What happened afterwards was the backlash, right? Was the AI winter of the 60s and the 70s. And I think the main reason why I'm quite cautious and very pragmatic and very rational when speaking about AI is because I don't believe we need the hype. I think we need promise. I think we need a real evaluation of the capabilities and the applications. But what I don't want to see is money being invested based on simply hype and promises, because I know that we have seen the historical examples that what follows afterwards will be the winter. And I don't want to spend the next 20 years trying to explain why we haven't achieved something. So, yeah, I guess for me, it's like if we don't get drunk, we won't have the hangover, is basically what I'm saying.
Well, I don't disagree, but unlike the internet, I think the internet, we weren't sure how to use it or what it was. But with AI, there does seem to be a lot of immediately useful value coming out of AI, and it does seem to be getting better and better at a very quick pace. right? And so I think that we will have good chances of avoiding that hangover. Yeah, if we hang our hat too much on, say, superintelligence without knowing why we actually need it, then we don't want to do that. But there's a lot of, I think, value coming out now to where I think we're going to avoid that
Again,
cycle.
in terms of value, I would want to see practical results before we start making conclusions.
Do you
Right?
think we
So
haven't
far,
seen enough practical results? No.
no.
Okay.
So far, all the research studies that I have seen say that AI, if we are talking about Gen AI or agentic AI, very specifically, right? Not all of AI, not all of robotics, not all of deep learning, because you have mentioned a lot of great examples that have shown value. But Gen AI and agentic AI solutions, you have seen this, the MIT study that showed that 95% of pilots don't scale, right? Or that all the measures productivity, like there is a perception, people feel like they um, get results quicker, but then they spend more time on checking the output or correcting the output or editing the output. So there is a lot of kind of trade-off, and it seems that the productivity has not increased at all, like at all.
Or even
Otherwise,
decreased, right? I mean, there are some studies that show that even as programmers, that the use of
decrease.
AI actually slowed them down. But then there's a lot of things being vibe coded and a lot of progress being made by people that don't have to be programmers, but you still need to have that oversight. And the value, like you said, the ROI of having a solution that's being created, but isn't necessarily secure or isn't really necessarily to go to an enterprise quality level or be deployed. So there's a false sense of progress. Is that your point?
Yeah, I think so. Like again, it's not just we will plug it in and everything will be fine. There is a lot of complexity, and there is a lot of need to make sure that things are accurate and secure, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Compromising that might feel fine today and tomorrow. It will come haunt businesses and individuals long term, which, again, as we've said, is what defines success. It's not your success today, it's whether or not you will stay successful in the future. And then the most recent studies that come out, and I think that's also the point that you've mentioned before, a lot of current Gen AI models are heavily subsidized, or the pricing is subsidized. We have not seen the appropriate pricing yet for them to become profitable. And we already see that newer models are so intensive and consume so many tokens that actually using Gen AI is more expensive than using human workers, right? There was a recent AWS report on that. So, and that we haven't seen the actual prices yet. Again, if we are talking about value as in monetary value, I think a lot of companies are going to have to reevaluate what they are investing.
So get something done with AI now while it's cheap, right?
Yes, but then again, we are getting back to the question of a vendor lock. If you are getting stuck with one model, with one vendor to do all of your work, what are you going to do when they increase their prices sixfold?
Yeah.
And you have fired all of your human workers and you don't have any human expertise in house. Now what?
That's true. It's a real concern.
So, and this is why AI sovereignty is important. I think is the conclusion.
Control your own destiny.
Yes, very much so.
All right, Irina, we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI. How do you see and how are you forging the future of AI?
Let me highlight a couple of really cool things that I'm very passionate about right now. Both of them are about raising the new generation of AI literate, AI competent professionals, right? I'm involved with the work of women in AI ethics and promoting the work of brilliant people all over the world who just do an amazing work on building responsible AI algorithms and building responsible companies in their AI use, in their AI sovereignty, and so on. I think, again, for me, this is about doing the right thing quite a bit and seeing the new generation of these amazing professionals is just very exciting, right? I'm also teaching a lot of AI literacy courses for different types of fellowships and courses, and I think what I'm getting at is basically maybe you and me have done what we can, right? But the new generation, the new um, wave of AI literate professionals, those will be the ones who are building the future. I want to make sure that I share everything I've got to get them to set them up for the best future they could possibly have.
Well, I think that's fascinating. Essentially, what you're saying is you are leaning into the human side
Yes,
in order to
absolutely.
ensure a better future by
Yes.
leveraging AI.
Oh, yes.
So that's really great. Well, Irina, thanks for being on the show. Fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
AI isn't just reshaping industries, it's reshaping how nations, organizations, and communities think about independence, resilience, and opportunity. Dr. Irina von Rosen is helping lead that conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and follow Forging the Future for more conversations with the people building what's next.